It's time to talk about more games and Xbox. Every time I talk about Xbox on the Twitters, there's always a follow-up tweet that says, Xbox has no games. And well, the reality is Xbox actually has a lot of games. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today is more games. No, that wasn't a stutter and anything else or an accident. We're talking more games because Xbox has no games, but in fact, we're talking about more games coming to Xbox. Whatever, you get the point. Anyways, as with tradition in the world of Microsoft, now that Game Pass is sort of running full steam downhill, is that they are announcing titles that are coming to Game Pass, and they're also announcing some that are leaving that we'll talk about here in a second. And Sea of Thieves has some really big news that we need to dive into as well. So I'm going to throw this image up on the screen here, and you can take a look at what the titles are that are coming to Xbox Game Pass. Now, there's one thing that I do want to point out that I at least find kind of interesting, and it's not completely new, but Microsoft really highlights now the three different endpoints for Xbox, right? They have the cloud, they have the console, and they have the PC, because there's now news, again, another marketable moment, as they call it in the industry, where they're bringing games that have already existed, but now that they're in the cloud, so hey, let's just talk about them. And then they get people like me to talk about them, and it brings them back into the news cycle, which is relatively hard to do in the world of console and just PC gaming in general. And yet here we are talking about Need for Speed Heat, Battlefront 2, Jedi, the Fallen Order is all coming now to the cloud via EA Play, realistically. And then there's a bunch of other titles, and most, honestly, the one I'm probably most looking forward to is Myst, or potentially Psychonauts 2, which are all coming to all three endpoints here this month. So just a pretty big deal in general. But things on the outgoing flow, because cloud gaming, or I should say Xbox Game Pass, is a service, which means titles come in and titles go out. So there are four notable titles that if you're playing them, you might want to be thinking about playing a whole bunch more, because they will be leaving on August 31st. And we have Blair Witch, we have Double Kick Heroes, NBA 2K21, which I suspect is probably highly played by a lot of people, and Stranger Things 3. So those are the titles that are coming in, and those are the titles that are also going out. But there's also some other news, and I think Microsoft deserves a lot of credit for this. We're going to talk about Sea of Thieves here for a minute, because they announced that in June they had their most active month ever, with 4.8 million players joining the high seas to play the new content. Now, we know the new content is part of the A Pirate's Life, I believe that's part of Season 3, and that's the Johnny Depp and everything else coming into Sea of Thieves, which is a natural integration point. But I think where Microsoft really deserves credit is if you rolled back the clock, and when Sea of Thieves launched, yes, it was sort of exciting and there was a lot of fun to be had, but I think it'd be worth pointing out that it wasn't bombastic response, right? I mean, it was like, okay, this is pretty neat, and Microsoft has done a fantastic job of keep putting more content into Sea of Thieves and keep investing in this title, and it is paying off in dividends. Things that are hard to do are to create those not like more casual titles. Remember, Phil Spencer talked a lot about wanting to add more casual titles, not just first-person shooters, and Sea of Thieves continues to do quite well. Many years, I believe we're about three and a half years, something like that after it launched, and they're now hitting record amount of players each month because they launched new content. That's a pretty big deal for a title, and more specifically, a service like Game Pass. And this is the type of content that Microsoft really wants to unlock inside its universe of studios. Now, not every title is going to go for this long shelf life and try to do the same things that Sea of Thieves is doing, but this is vitally important to a service like Xbox Game Pass, because now they can get people in and get them keep playing. While we have seen good things from developers saying, hey, look, when our title goes into Game Pass and then when it comes out, we get a bump in sales. That is great. Microsoft doesn't operate on that same gaming model with its own titles. Once they're in, they're in. Like Psychonauts 2, it'd be shocking if that ever came out of Game Pass, because it's a Microsoft title at the end of the day, and they're going to keep it in there for the entire life of Xbox Game Pass. Sea of Thieves is the same type of model. It's a first-party title. It's going to stay in there, so keeping it relevant and fresh and keeping the titles front of mind is a really big deal for Microsoft. So this is a huge milestone for them, and shows that, hey, even though a title is aging, doesn't mean it's necessarily off the radar. Minecraft is another, that Minecraft is probably like the best example inside the world of Microsoft of a longevity title, but Sea of Thieves is probably starting to peck up there. It's not quite Minecraft, caliber yet, but it's getting there. Like, it's on that trajectory of having a long shelf life, and that is something Microsoft desperately wants, because titles are so expensive to to develop, and if they flop, it's a really big business risk. So having longevity in a title like Sea of Thieves and keep putting more dollars in and getting more quality content out is showing that it does pay dividends, and I would expect to see Microsoft to continue to do this with other types of titles that have been announced and potentially have not been announced. So there you go, guys. That's just a little bit of a more games update here. Quick splash on a Tuesday. Microsoft is obviously going to continue to invest heavily into Xbox Game Pass. Unfortunately, we still don't have any numbers yet, and that's a little bit, I think Microsoft kind of owes it to us, not me personally, but to the shareholders who are now judging Microsoft on this metric to come out and start talking more about Game Pass. So there's a lot of things still on the horizon too, right? I think we're going to start to see Microsoft's marketing and holiday message show up here probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks or so, right? We're starting to get close to that. Hey, if you're going to be buying content for the holidays, if you're going to try to get a console, cross your fingers and be checking all the stock inventory, because that's going to be a challenge in itself. But I think we're going to start to see that marketing message come back around and start really ramping up in the month of September. It's been relatively quiet in the world of Xbox for the month of August so far, I should say, although that will ramp up again here at the end of the month. So I believe it's Gamescom on the 24th. I might be off on those dates, but around that timeline, they're going to have another streaming event where they'll talk about, again, titles and things that are coming for the end of the year. The reason why I get really kind of amped about this holiday stuff is because this is a massive marketing initiative for Microsoft this fall into the December month of the year. I was going to say fall into winter, but it's primarily fall and maybe just a smidge of winter. The October, November, December is a huge shopping time. And so Microsoft has to run into it, and it's been preparing, honestly, probably since February or so, to get all of these ducks in a row, not your Sea of Thieves ducks, but like actual ducks in the marketing world, or your assets lined up to launch this holiday shopping season. And so now we are we're going to start to see it on the 24th, if that's when the Gamescom is. That's when we're going to start to see that messaging start to materialize. And so that is something just to be on the lookout for as we sort of move through the rest of the month of August when it comes to what's happening in the world of gaming. It's just I know I say it's an interesting time a lot, but it is, because we're on the cusp of going over that hill of Microsoft launching these marketing initiatives. I'm going to be really curious to see what Halo Infinite material starts coming out. Like, are they going to have the Nerf stuff? Are they going to have the Doritos and all that stuff lined back up again, which launched last year, and then obviously the game didn't launch, and so now they're kind of reworking that mechanic. I'm curious to see what goes on there and see if there's anything going to be coming down the pipeline with Sea of Thieves. Obviously, Microsoft knows that the title has longevity at this point. 3.5 years in, that's not a joke. I mean, that's a pretty healthy life cycle for a game to be on the shelf and still being actively played and content being added to. And you could imagine maybe they're going to be lining up something for the holiday season as well when it comes to this title. They had the big Disney launch in the springtime, and so now we're moving towards the colder months of the year, at least in the northern hemisphere. So I don't know, that's a little bit of rambling of things I'm looking forward to for the month of August. As always, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.